Why do teenagers feel the way they do? Being a teenager is a difficult time in life. It's filled with lots of emotional highs and lows, lots of changes, and a lot of self-discovery. And as a clinical psychologist that's been working with teens for years, I've seen firsthand how a lot of teenagers and families can be very confused and distressed during this period of life. So why do teenagers feel the way they do? The answer lies in a combination of biological, emotional, and social factors. During teenage years, individuals go through a range of processes: brain development, hormonal changes, social pressures. These factors, while essential for the maturation process, can be very distressing and confusing. Today, we're going to explore why teenagers experience such intense emotions and how these emotions can impact their behavior. To understand why teenagers feel so deeply, we first have to understand what's going on biologically during teenage years. During puberty, there's a lot that goes on: brain development, hormonal changes that can impact how teenagers think and how they feel. Puberty triggers a release of hormones that can affect mood, their behavior, and their development. These include a release of sex hormones, such as testosterone and estrogen, that not only play a key role in physical development, but also in emotional experiences. The brain also undergoes a lot of reorganization and development during this period. One such area that's growing quite rapidly during teenage years is what's called the prefrontal cortex. It's actually located right up here. And this is the seat of executive functioning. So being able to think about the future, decision making, attention, memory, concentration. Some of the old research talks about how it goes up to about age 25, but I actually did my dissertation on identity development and puberty development in teens. And some of the research out there indicates that it goes all the way up to age 35, that there's something that's called gray and white matter development in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex, that continues to happen until age 35. And I'll put all of my references down below in the description. Another area that goes under a lot of changes and is especially heightened during this time is something called the limbic system, the seat of where our emotions are. And in adults, that's much more regulated. But during the teenage years, because of all the hormones that I've talked about, and again, with the brain developing, this area is very much heightened. So what does this mean? This means that when your teen is experiencing an emotion, they experience it on a much deeper level than what you or I may experience at. So what may seem something very innocuous, they had a fight with a friend, or they had a difficult day at school, to you and I might seem like, hey, you know what, there's always tomorrow, it's not a big deal, we'll move on from it. To them, it's an emotional event. This is a big deal. They are feeling their feelings, and it can very much affect them. Adolescence is a time of intense emotions and identity development, to where teens are navigating a time in their life of self-discovery, and they're trying to figure out who they are and how they fit into this world. So there's a couple of really key changes that are happening during this time. One of those key changes, like I mentioned before, is intense emotions. So with teens, they are experiencing very intense emotions, to where they're feeling very high highs, very excited, very joyous, but also very low lows. They become very depressed, very disappointed, very angry, seemingly out of nowhere at times, because again, their limbic system is extremely activated. So another area that changes during this time is identity development or identity exploration. Teens are trying to find their place in the world. They're trying to figure out who they are. How do they fit in? What are their values? So what you may see is that they're trying on different personas. They're trying out different behaviors. And when they feel misunderstood, they might become more isolated. Another area is heightened sensitivity to peer influence. So teens are going to be much more sensitive to what their peers think about them. What do their friends think about them? What do others think about them? And with this can come a whole host of emotions to where they feel rejected if they said something off-putting or if one of their friends wasn't very accepting of them. So in essence, peer influence can have an outsized impact on their emotional well-being. And teenagers may experience anxiety, depression, as I mentioned before, euphoria, all kinds of very strong emotions because of these influences, or even because of social media. And another one is struggles with independence and autonomy. Teenagers, again, are trying to find their place in the world. So even though they still need guidance, they still need boundaries, they still need their parents to help them, they're also trying to find their voice. They're also trying to find out who they are, what they stand for. And there's going to be a struggle between any sort of authority figure, not just you, but teachers and other authority figures in their life, because they want to assert their autonomy. They want to find their place in the world. So they're going to stand up for what they believe in. And what you may find is that they're going to reject some of your advice to where a couple of years ago, they would have taken it just fine. But now, because they're finding their voice, they're finding out who they are, they don't want anything to do with the advice that you're trying to give. Now let's talk about how all these changes can influence your teen's behavior. So all these changes that I've talked about so far aren't just going to be internal that happens when teenagers are going through puberty and developing, because their prefrontal cortex is growing and they still quite haven't developed the ability to slow themselves down, to plan ahead. What's the opposite of that? Well, they're going to be more impulsive. They're going to engage in more risky behaviors. It's going to be difficult for them to regulate their emotions. What you might find is that teenagers aren't able to pull themselves back when they feel those intense emotions, when they get really upset about something, when they get really angry about something, when they're really anxious about something. They can't pull themselves back to be able to self-regulate, at least not as well as an adult can. So some common behaviors linked to these different changes, one of them is mood swings. Teenagers can swing from feeling on top of the world to extremely depressed in what seems like a blink of an eye. And these mood swings are natural. These are caused by hormonal shifts and brain development. Another one is social withdrawal. So with all of these intense emotions, teenagers may withdraw, want to spend more time alone. And what this could be associated with is not just depression, but also a natural part of being a teenager, to where they need longer amounts of time in order to process through their emotions. Another one is risk-taking behaviors. With that increased activity in the limbic system, that's going to increase the need for sensory input, thrill-seeking, essentially. So what you may see is teenagers doing a lot of risky behaviors, driving really fast, experimenting with drugs. And while these behaviors may seem reckless, because they are, they're also associated with the brain's reward system. Because again, it's in a very heightened state to where these things feel very intense for them, and it's very rewarding for them. I feel like I should note that in no way, shape, or form am I endorsing any of these things for teenagers to do. I'm just bringing it up because these are natural parts of being a teenager, and the purpose of this video is to give you some insight into why they're doing the things that they do and why are they feeling the way that they feel. Again, it's not an endorsement. I'm just explaining what naturally can happen during teenage years. And another one is increased conflict with parents. Teenagers are trying to find autonomy, their own independence. So what you may find when you lay down some rules in the home, teenagers are going to push back. They're going to push back and figure out where those boundaries are, because they're trying to assert themselves. They're trying to find out who they are. And how do you do that? You explore, you push, you see where the boundaries are in life. And again, it's a natural thing for teenagers to do this because they want to find out their own autonomy. They want to gain control over their own lives. While adolescence is a time for intense emotions, it's also a time for growth and development. And these emotions are not just teen angst or hormonal differences or hormonal shifts. These are essential in the maturation process. These are essential in human development for teenagers to go through. It's natural to have these feelings. It's natural for teenagers to engage in these various behaviors. Again, we don't have to agree with it. In fact, it can be a very scary time as a parent. And what I want to impress upon you is that these things are natural. That way you can meet your teen with understanding and be able to support them. Here's some different ways that you can go about that. So one way is to actively listen. Teenagers need to feel listened to and heard. And in order for this to happen, you have to be able to listen to them, but you have to listen to them non-judgmentally, not jumping in and giving them advice, not telling them what to do, not telling them how to feel their feelings, but being there, listening and trying to understand and validate their feelings, that it makes sense that you're feeling this way. That's going to be extremely impactful. Another one is to set clear boundaries with empathy. This is kind of love and logic approach. So where there needs to be natural consequences to their behavior. And at the same time, and this is extremely essential, to meet their behavior with empathy. So even though they may do something ridiculous or irrational or disobey the rules, hey, you stayed out late last night. Curfew was 10 o'clock and you didn't get back here till 1 a.m. You're grounded. And also meeting that with empathy. I understand why you were out late last night. You were concerned about your friends. You're worried about them. And at the same time, curfew was at 10 and you didn't get back here till 1. There's a consequence to that. When you say it that second time around, when you add the empathy in, can you see how much more of an impact that will make? That they're going to be able to understand that more because you're validating their feelings. You're trying to put yourselves into their shoes. And at the same time, there are consequences to our behavior. Encourage healthy emotional expression. Sometimes teenagers, especially when they get home after school with all of the pressures, the social pressures that they experience throughout the day, the academic rigor that's going on at school, they can have some meltdowns. They can have some pretty intense emotions when they get home. And in my experience, sometimes that can look like yelling and screaming and punching the wall and throwing things around. And that's not acceptable. There's far better ways to express our emotions than that. So encouraging them to do some journaling or art or be able to talk with you or one of their friends so they can process through their emotions is a much better way of dealing with their emotions than exploding. And last but not least, as a parent, I want you to remember to be patient. If you take anything away from what I talked about today, and hopefully it reminded you of when you were a teenager and how difficult life was at that point in time, how new these experiences were for you. I want you to be able to understand that being able to practice patience with your teen is going to be key because they don't yet have the emotional regulation abilities, both biologically and just as a skill set, in order to pull themselves back all of the time, in order to regulate their emotions all the time. So meeting that with some understanding and some patience is going to be key. Teenage emotions are complex and multifaceted through biological factors, social pressures, hormonal differences, brain development, and being able to see all these complexities is going to be able to give you some understanding. in where your teen is at and how they're functioning and how they're able to regulate themselves. But I also want to talk about where if you feel that your teen is experiencing their emotions, their anxiety, their depression, their sadness, their anger, and it's gone to an extreme level to where it is natural for teenagers to get angry, to disagree, to become worried about things. But when it becomes so intense and for such a long time, and it gets very frequent, you're their parent. You know them to where if it's becoming an issue, please reach out for help. Please contact a mental health professional so that they can evaluate them, speak with them, engage in therapy with them, and hopefully help them through these very difficult times. Okay, so that's it for this video, but I've got another one about teenage anxiety that hopefully you'll like. I'll include what is anxiety, what's the symptoms of it, and some really good evidence-based coping skills. So hopefully I see you there. Take care. Bye-bye.